Morning, guys. Dr. Ken Nordberg. You know, this past hunting season, a few weeks ago, November, was one of the most interesting hunting seasons I can remember. And what was particularly interesting about it was that much of what I try to teach people about hunting older bucks worked perfectly. There was, take John. He took 3 bucks this year. They're all at the taxidermist now. They're going to be on the wall next fall. And whereas none of them are record book bucks, they're nice bucks, pretty nice bucks. And it's not often somebody in my camp is as fortunate as John was this past year. And this is made possible, of course, by party hunting. You know, for, I would say about 25 years, my 3 boys and I have been pretty insistent that we shoot our own bucks. Not interested in party hunting at all. But during the last several years now, our deer numbers have been really low. And some of parts of my study area have been devoid of deer for about 3 years. No tracks, nothing in them for years. And I keep waiting for them to become repopulated, but it's been taking time. We had a few more deer in our area this year, including some fawns, more than I normally find in November each year, because our wolves usually kill at least 3 out of 4 fawns every year by November 1st. But it was a great hunting season nonetheless. We had a lot of moonlight that can ruin a hunt. We had really cold weather, which can really screw things up for a few days. Lots of the reasons why we could have gone home with lots of excuses about why we didn't do so well. I talked to a number of hunters who hunt in the same area on either side of us, who went home with no deer. They said it was really a tough season, but we still had one of the best we've ever had. Now, I mentioned John got 3. It's kind of interesting because each buck he took was taken as a result of something important happening. In the case of the first buck he took on opening day, his biggest one, the 10-pointer, that one was taken as a result of good scouting and a good knowledge of the area he hunted that evening. He knew that area very well. He knows every foot of that country in that area, and he had good reason to believe that would be a good spot to hunt that evening on opening day. So that was good scouting that made that one possible. The third one was a result of patience. Patience for the wind to be right. The first time the wind was right, and he had to wait several days for that, it wasn't until the 3rd day that he could get in there because of it. Because of that, a couple of moose upset a doe in that area so much that she was just snorting her tail when he arrived there in the dark that first morning he hunted there. And of course, that kind of thing, when that happens, you aren't going to see any deer in the area during daylight hours for some time. Maybe 5 days. 5 days is, things get back to normal if everything else is okay. They aren't bothered by hunters during that time. But that took patience, and not taking a chance on going to a stand site with the wind at your back, for example, or not overusing that spot, knowing that your odds of seeing a buck there wouldn't be very good for a while. He stayed clear of that spot till the next time he went in there. The second buck, though, that one was really interesting. This took some real knowledge of truthful whitetail lore, particularly everything that has something to do with breeding. You know, while we were hunting there, breeding was in progress. We were in the middle of the first phase of breeding, 2-week period of breeding, first of the 3 periods, when we arrived in deer camp. Morning, guys. John and I are just getting set to set up our camp, and on the way to our spot here on this logging trail, we ran across tracks of a buck with a doe in heat. And you see up here where the way he's been dragging his hoofs from track to track, he's under the influence of doe and estrus pheromone. Looks kind of interesting. It's kind of cold here this morning. It's going to be a cold day for setting up camp. And boy, you know, this year it seemed like there was a fair amount of activity going on almost every day because of breeding, even under adverse conditions. And we had snow, and 4 inches of snow most of the time while we were up there. And that made it possible to see tracks and to measure tracks. For most of us, we do it visually. We don't put a ruler on there. We've done this so many years. We can say, that's a big buck that made that track, or that's a mature buck, and that's a doe, and that's a fawn, and that's a yearling doe, that kind of thing. Well, snow made a big difference. And not only be able to easily see tracks and figure out which deer are in the area right now. These are fresh. That buck is close. It didn't run, it was walking. It's near right now. Those kind of things. But was able to see urine that made by a doe that was spotted with blood. Urine spotted with blood is the urine of a doe that's in heat. It's in estrus. And that only happens for about 24 to 26 hours during the 2-week period. Not all does are in estrus the same day. Some days there's only 1 in a square mile in estrus, maybe 2, and maybe none. And in the next square mile, maybe there was 1 on a day when there was none in this one, or maybe 2. But it's kind of spread out, you know. You get 4 square mile area. Chances are 1 or 2, or at least 2 does are in estrus, in heat at the same time. But they aren't all in estrus at the same time, and they aren't all in estrus for 2 weeks. There's only little short periods, intermittent. Yearling does and mature does. So anyway, mature does are does 2.5 years of age or older. Now, during that period, not all bucks are active. You know, during the 2 weeks before breeding begins, the big dominant breeding bucks chase all the lesser bucks out of their claimed breeding ranges. So during that period, there's even fewer bucks within the area where you normally find lots of signs of bigger bucks earlier in the year and later, after breeding is over. So there are fewer bucks, but the bucks that were there are the big ones, the big dominant bucks. Well, right now, because our deer numbers are low, down to 5 per square mile, a lot of those bucks, or a good number of those bucks, are younger dominant breeding bucks. Normally our dominant breeding bucks are 4.5 to 6.5 years of age. And bucks of that age are not uncommonly, they not uncommonly weigh as much as 300 pounds or a little more in the area we hunt. Big deer. But we don't have the genetics there for huge antlers for these huge bucks. They're just kind of average. You get one that goes over 150, you know, the antlers measure more than 150 inches. That's a pretty nice buck here in the area we hunt. In the 30 years we've been hunting there, I only know of one that was taken, that it was actually taken where we hunt by another hunter, that it was record book quality. But we love that area. And it doesn't matter if that buck weighs 300 pounds or he only weighs, or he's a 3.5-year-old or 4.5, 5.5, 6.5-year-old. That is a difficult buck to hunt. That's a smart buck. And they're stand smart. They're used to stand hunting, us stand hunting. By day 3 every hunting season, they know we're hunting them. And we're playing this cat and mouse game with them. They don't leave the area because we're stand hunters, because we don't pursue deer. We don't make drives, we don't still hunt. We stand hunt. We sit in one place half a day at a time. So they don't worry about us when they find us out there. We're sitting there doing nothing. So they stay in their home ranges and keep doing things they normally do, but staying away from where they find us. But that doesn't do them a lot of good, because every half day we move. So they don't know where we are every day at the beginning of the day, although we keep finding evidence that they're keeping track of us. Like bedding on a high little knoll back in the woods close to our camp, where they can watch us or listen to us moving away from camp every morning. Going past them to the north or going south, they hear us going that way. And then they know, gee, well, it's safe to be in this part of our range this day, because, or this morning or this afternoon, because they're over there, not here, that kind of thing. They do that. Whitetails are that intelligent. When they're at least 2.5 years of age or older, when they have their own home ranges, you know, yearlings don't have their own home ranges. They live on the ranges of their mothers and are still under the direction of their mothers. All this is going on. So, in the midst of all this, for somebody to do something like John did when he took that second deer was pretty amazing. You have to know all these things to make it work. Otherwise, you're just guessing. John wasn't guessing. Let's talk about that. He spent his morning north of camp in an area that we call, well, near an area that a big solid hunk of granite that looks like a beached whale, hunting in that area. About 600 yards north of camp. And it was a cold morning. On that morning, everybody was coming back to camp early. His son Jimmy and I were both in camp by 10:15. We usually stay at our stand site till at least 11. And John was on his way back as well. And on the way, he came upon some beds in the snow. Recently vacated beds. You know, we had a little light snow falling that morning, and the beds were hardly covered with any snow at all. They were, you know, you could tell they were fresh. You could see the grass where the deer had been laying in the snow, and you found the bed of a mature doe, and usually those are, you know, about 40 inches, 38, 40 inches long. And then right next to them, next to that bed, were beds of 2 fawns. You had twin fawns, and they lay there back to back, like one was watching this way and the other was watching this. They're kind of being extra cautious about making sure nothing could get close to them without those 3 deer knowing it.
Hey guys, this is John here. I wanted to show you the doe bed. It's not a very big bed. And then over here, that's 2 fawn beds, back to back. There's one here, and there's one there. So this doe has twin fawns. So that's one of the things that allowed me to know immediately that this was a doe, because she had her fawns with. And we have a logging trail right over here. It's hard to see through the trees, but if a hunter or a car goes down that logging trail right there, the doe will know what's happening. So this is an example, one of the deer that keeps track of our comings and goings. There's a logging road right over there.
So anyway, he found those beds, but more importantly, well, he noticed that the fawns and the doe had walked away from the beds. They didn't bound away in alarm. If that had been the case, they could have been a long way from that area, but they had walked away without any reason, without any alarm, and which meant at that moment they were close, somewhere near. They were downwind of where he was. So very close to that bedding, and he found urine in the snow, a little bit of light snow on top, with red spots in it. Red, orange, it kind of becomes orange in the snow.
More than any other detail, this is the detail that allowed me to get that buck. This is the doe's urine. An example of a doe in estrus, and how she'll have some blood in her urine. That was critical. That's all it takes, too. Sometimes that's all you need to know some critical detail.
He knew right away that doe was in heat. And he knew then, and most hunters wouldn't visualize this, that pheromone pouring from that doe urine in the snow was being emitted into the air and spreading downwind. The wind was from the northwest that morning, so the downwind scent vector was toward the southeast. And as it spreads into that area, it becomes a triangular area. 200 yards downwind in a light wind, like say 5 miles an hour, that scent vector could be up to 200 yards wide. But that morning we had a 10-mile-an-hour wind, cold, mean wind. But it was, so the scent vector doesn't get as wide as it at first. When it goes down, it has to go quite a ways before it gets that wide. But it's going downwind. And in that whole area there, downwind as it's spreading, there's the best buck lure in the woods. No buck lure can compete with that buck lure because there's no human scent mixing in with it. Well, John knew his was, he had to get out of there. Well, sure, he has scent in trail scent wherever he walked. He must have the trail scent that morning. But that doesn't just rise into the air and spread downwind. It's the scent coming from his own body that does that. So right away he figured, I got to get away from this. Right away, get out of here. Because this is a setup. This is something that might work out really well. I'm going to get downwind of this urine, and probably the doe, that doe with her fawns was pretty close by. Couldn't see him, but they're there watching him because that was what that doe did a lot of, is watching what we were doing, and they probably knew all along what John was doing all this time. So what he decided to do is get away from there and get to a downwind position somewhere that he figured was kind of on the western edge of that scent vector spreading downwind. Out of that out of that scent vector, he didn't want to taint that with his own airborne human scent. So at that point, he wasted no time. He went west, out of the area as quickly as possible. He got back to the logging trail that we use a lot to go north and south from our camp. And he got over to that logging trail, and he was probably a couple hundred yards west at that point. No danger at all of tainting that downwind scent vector. But he was thinking, you know, bucks can smell that pheromone a mile away. There was lots of country south of them or south or southeast in the direction that scent vector was going, where a buck could be living at this very moment and was coming northwest to find that doe. So I say that could be happening right now. So he was really anxious to take advantage of this knowledge. So he went west and then south, well, more southeast along that logging trail until he was almost right at a camp. And then he went back into the woods there and went north a little ways, northeast a little ways, and where he found a boulder on the edge of what he thought would be safe from having his scent taint that downwind scent vector. And that was, I'll tell you something, that's amazing. You know, most hunters, if they found doe urine with blood in it, they would probably think, well, that's interesting. But they wouldn't know how to take advantage of it. They couldn't visualize this downwind triangular area forming because that's full of this pheromone that attracts bucks. They wouldn't think of that at all as something to take advantage of. And even if they could, a lot of stand hunters couldn't do a thing about it because they would go back to the same stand site over and over again, day after day, year after year. They're stuck there. They're pinned to that tree where that stand is in the tree. Using a folding stool, you know, like this, that enables you to move about anytime you want, any time of the day, any distance you want, to take advantage of certain deer signs, is what greatly improves your chances of taking mature bucks during the hunting season. You know, we took 4 mature bucks. One of my grandsons took a yearling buck, a forky. But that was a great season for us because, you know, usually we only take 4 mature bucks a hunting season because we don't want to overhunting our bucks. Considering the fact that there's only 1 dominant breeding buck in a square mile. Yeah, before each season begins, we're all thinking, oh, we'd like to get a really big buck this year. And the biggest ones, of course, are the dominant breeding bucks. Now, this year we had 11 hunters in camp. And just imagine if we all thought we had to get a dominant breeding buck, or if we could even, we'd have to hunt 11 square miles. We just couldn't scout that many square miles and be ready for a hunting season during the time that we usually have for doing such things. It just can't be done. And it's kind of ridiculous. And besides that, each year out of 4 square miles, we're lucky if we take 1 of those really big 300-pound bucks. That's most years, before 5 years ago, when our numbers got to be really low because of wolves and severe winters, we usually took at least 1 of those big dominant bucks every year. And the rest of them were a little bit younger bucks. This year, we got 4, but 3 of them were 3 of the mature bucks were 3.5-year-olds. Only 1 was a 4.5. That 4.5 is a big 10-pointer. He's a nice buck. Well, the 3.5s weren't bad. They're pretty nice bucks too. A lot of hunters put smaller bucks on the wall than those 3.5-year-olds that John took this year. And so they're nice bucks, and they'll look good on the wall forever. But at any rate, we all want to do that, but because we can't hunt 11, 12 square miles, maybe half that at best, we have to limit the number of bucks we take every year. We're good buck hunters. We could be really hard on our mature bucks every year if we took more than 4 each year. But 4 works out well. It seems like every year we know of a big dominant breeding buck we'd like to take, and several little bit smaller bucks. Bucks with droppings 3/4 inch long and with tracks measuring 3 3/4 inch in length. Those bucks that we know, boy, those are bucks you can't hardly turn up. Here comes one, at least in our area, because they don't get bigger antlers. And but they're hard to hunt. We love to hunt them, and we're good at it. Well, anyway, so that's why we limit ourselves to 4 big bucks per year, 4 mature bucks a year. And anyway, there's so much to know. But anyway, let's get back to John. You know, he decided to make this big detour well to the west, out of that, away from that downwind scent vector made by that doe. And he got close to camp. In fact, he went in right on the trail that we use where we hang our bucks behind camp for cooling and draining. Went in there, and then he headed north until he was at a spot where he figured that downwind scent vector should be, the edge of it should be just up ahead. And it was in an open area of poplars. In some parts of it, you could see 100 yards. And some parts not that far, maybe 50 yards, depending on which way you look. But it was a fairly open area, you know, all these big trees, and all full of snow, you know, which makes the whitetails easier to spot. But it's full of that doe's pheromone. So I figured there's almost, you know, you could almost bet a buck will show up in this area in front of him. So there he sat down in front of that boulder, which would help make his silhouette invisible to surrounding air. A big dark side in front of him, sit there, and this part of him was visible above the boulder, but that was clad in blaze orange, and to a deer that looks glowing white.
So this morning I was hunting about 600 yards upwind over that way, and I was getting cold, and I did a little scouting walking into the road, and about 400 yards up that way I spotted some beds. One was a doe, and there were 2 fawn beds right next to each other, and there was some pea on the ground that was kind of a orange, reddish orange. So I know she was in heat. That's a sign that she's in estrus. So anyhow, I went out to our logging trail over here, came back to our camp. Our camp's like 75 yards over here. This is right behind camp. And the wind is blowing this way. And it's fairly strong, so I thought either a buck downwind might come through this open area, or a buck that was with the doe would come this way. And that's what happened. The buck I got is right over there, and I was just sitting here and heard it coming and put my gun up, and I had one of those stare downs where it was stomping its feet, and I just put the gun up and shot it, and it worked, partly because I knew the thing about the doe and estrus and the pea in the ground, so that was one of the key things here. So I was able to get downwind of where the doe was. So anyhow, it's a nice buck. I'm happy. This is the second one now this year.
So, like snow. So, pretty well disguised there, sitting in front of that boulder and sitting very still. But by the time he sat down on a stool there, a buck had already passed that spot. But not by very far, only about 30 yards. And I'm sure when John went in there and found that spot to sit and sat down, he had to have made some noises that buck heard. He was in there. He was over to the right a little bit probably. And he heard these sounds, but they were in that soft fluffy snow, a hunter can move pretty quietly. So he couldn't be sure what he heard. Maybe saw a movement even, but he couldn't be sure. The movement didn't tell him what he was seeing. So, being a big buck, he had to know what was there. And I'll bet you anything, that buck was saying, it might be the doe is smelling. That doe that's in heat, that might have been what moved over there. So, he had to move over out there on John's left and to see if he could see what made the sound. Maybe it's the doe, you see. But that sealed its fate. It walked into this opening. Well, there was a fair number of hazels between where John was sitting and the buck. But John spotted that movement, and there it was, and it came to a stop, standing broadside, looking right toward him. Well, here again, you know, everything John did up to this point was perfect. I mean, it doesn't work every time, but it works a lot. I've done this. I've had it work. I've taken some of my biggest bucks under circumstances like this. But it worked for John. But at this point, another set of precautions came to John's mind. Like that first buck he saw opening morning. It was standing about 30 yards away, about the same distance. John thinks it might have been this exact same buck. And here it was. But anyway, so one of the things he did, you know, he remembered from that first encounter is that when that buck was standing there looking at him, it didn't move until John blinked. And away it went. He didn't get a chance to shoot. It disappeared so quickly. So he didn't want that to happen again. So this time he squinted. He got his eyes down, so he was really squinting in case he did blink, it wouldn't be so noticeable. That's good buck. That's good buck hunting, you guys. That's a great precaution. I haven't talked about that. But John mentioned that, said, that was a darn good idea. Really good. You know, his face was covered with a camel head net, but he had the oblong eye hole like I usually have on when I'm out there, so the eyes are visible. But other than that, the rest of his head probably didn't look like a human, but the buck was looking there. And then he was being really careful. He had to get the safety off on his rifle, and he did that really carefully as well. No sound. And then he started raising his rifle as slowly as he could. And this is an agonizing time. Here's this nice buck looking right at you, 30 yards away, and you're trying to get your rifle up so you shoot. So he's raising his rifle very slowly, and you know that buck had tapped the ground a couple of times with a front hoof trying to get him to move so he could help to make it possible for him to figure out what that thing is over there by that boulder. Couldn't figure it out yet. He's looking at it, but John, so he's moving really slowly, getting his rifle up, slow. Finally, he was about 3 inches from having his rifle up where he could look at it through a scope, you know. And John couldn't stand it any longer. All in one swift motion, up came his gun, and he had that upper part of that buck's chest in his scope, partly to avoid those intervening hazels. You know, can make a 7mm Magnum bullet ricochet or explode and hitting just a little twig on the way to the buck. So he went high on that buck's chest area, but he came right up and pulled the trigger, just like that. And the buck went right down. That was also a good hunting technique. You know, when you think of all he did, and ended up taking a buck only 75 yards behind camp. What? Nowhere. Normally a buck wouldn't be there, but it was there because of that downwind scent vector full of doe and heat pheromone. That's why it was there. And it was not, and he knew all this. This was all going on in his mind, and it was all proper thinking and proper things to do, and his stool made it possible. that's why that turned into one of the best example of masterful buck hunting I've ever seen. That was wonderful. That was great. John just did a really good job.
Well, this is the buck. He's a nice 8-pointer. So the rock that I was sitting at was just right over there. And here's the main wound. And he was down, and I came up and put an extra shot in his neck to finish him off. I was so close, I was able to walk up right away. But this may be the buck I saw a couple mornings ago. So anyhow, beautiful 8-pointer.
Beautiful 8-pointer. This is kind of crazy though. Right behind our camp, you know, we've been walking a mile, 2 miles to get to stand sites. There's no reason why a buck should be here. This open popple, it's all hazels, no food here. But John decided to sit over there, and by golly, this thing showed up. The only reason could possibly be that this buck was in this vicinity because of that doe and heat upwind from here. And John recognized that right away and took advantage of that. But whatever the story, I think his son Jimmy and I are going to shadow him closely wherever he goes during the next 2 days. Great job, John. The year of John, 2 nice bucks this year, big 10-pointer and now this nice 8-pointer. Yeah, that's great. With each buck he's took, it was that same thing over and over. Really good shooting, really good thinking, good reasons for the thinking, and be able to do things wherever things were right, like the wind was right and the tracks were right, fresh. We don't hunt where there's no fresh deer tracks. We don't hunt where there's no fresh buck tracks. We want to hunt every half day in an area that is being frequented by a big buck today. Now, to keep going to a place where there's no fresh tracks, that's silly. Might as well be sitting in your car or something. To hunt where there's no fresh buck tracks, if you want to take bucks, is a waste of time. And it becomes a waste of time the more times you go back to the same spot. Soon. So anyway, this is what I've been trying to teach you guys for years. I've been trying to teach hunters this since 1980. Now, so that's what a great tip that is. You know, I'm going to talk about Dave's buck. That was another example of great tree stand hunting. Wait till you see the photos though, that go with that one. Really wonderful. By the way, John will make a map, a graphic of how this all works, so you can look at it and learn better about taking advantage of downwind scent vectors of bucks and being crosswind of them rather than upwind of them. That's important. Or downwind of them. That's even awful. Which way is the buck going to come toward doe and estrus dorsum? It's going to come from downwind. And if you're in that downwind scent vector, they're going to smell you, and then they're not going to come. They may go to the doe, they may circle widely, make a big tour around you, detour around you to get to where the doe is. But you aren't going to fool any bucks doing that. Years ago, you know, we used to put that doe and estrus dorsum down in front of us on the downwind side of a stand tree. And about 12 film canisters filled with doe and estrus dorsum cotton all around us like that. And watch downwind and bucks would come, even though our scent was going to where they were. Because they didn't realize at that point that that was dangerous. You don't go to that scent with human scent drifting from the same source. Nowadays you got to be crosswind and not in that scent vector. You see how it can work? John would have never taken this buck if he hadn't done all the things he did. And that was a lot of good thinking that made that possible. So think about that, you guys. Now we're going to talk some more about some of these other bucks, and how other types of thinking and other things that people did made it possible to take those mature bucks this last fall. And they're all as interesting as this. So we'll get back to you sometime very soon and start explaining how each of those bucks was taken. Well, now one of the things, it's not too late to get your book. Write to Santa. Ask Santa to bring you this book. You know, one of the things I want to mention about this book, it's got a soft cover. All the photography inside is black and white. Now, the reason for that is, this got to, I spent 3 years writing this thing. This got to be a huge book. And I wanted it to have all of the best of what you needed to know to be a regularly successful buck hunter. And it turned out to be lots of stuff. Now, if I had made this with a hardcover and with all the photography and color inside, this thing would have cost twice as much or more, maybe 80 bucks a copy. I've thought about making a hardcover with color photography. That would be beautiful. But, you know, I've been selling my books since 1980, or since the 1980s. And I learned early, way back when, that books like this don't normally sell well because a lot of hunters can't afford them. And they find a reason not to buy it because they can't afford it. And I remember back in the days when I first started selling my first editions, Whitetail Hunter's Almanac, which only sold for $7.95 a piece, I remember people saying they thought that was too much money, $7.95. Well, as years went by, they got to be more expensive to reprint. Finally, I had to start charging $9.95, and I was worried about how that might affect sales. Well, it didn't. But today I ended up with this one, and I kind of went out on a limb making one book instead of maybe 5 of this. You know, I could have come up with 10th through 15th Whitetail Hunter's Almanacs with all the material that's in this one book. But I'm 84 years old. How many more books am I going to be able to write? I don't know. But when you're my age, you got to be thinking, well, you know, you buy a refrigerator, that's the last one of those I'll ever buy. Buy another pickup, that's the last one I'll ever have to buy. I'm thinking, you know, one of these days I need to buy my coffin so my kids won't have that expense when I die. You know, and I got to be thinking that way at my age. I better make this book. I'm gonna, the way it is, as large as it is. So. But who knows, you know, maybe a few years from now, and I'm thinking, well, maybe we should come out with a special collector's edition with a hardcover and all color photography and some of the newest things that I'll be talking about. Because, you know, whenever I learn something new, because of my ongoing hunting related research with wild deer, I always share it. Or at least I always share it when I know what I'm teaching is going to work for other hunters. It's repeatable. And sometimes it takes 10 years to come to a conclusion. This is a good hunting method. It's time I start teaching people this thing because it's going to work for them. So anyway, maybe we'll come out with a collector's edition, but you know, I probably can't make money on one because I'd be afraid to publish a whole bunch of them. It cost me a ton of money that I may not recover. So doing a few at a time, like say 100 at a time, I wouldn't make any money on a book like that. Because I'd have all this money invested in it, and I'd want to keep my price as low as possible. I've always done that. And that's why this book is made the way it is. But it's got everything you need to know to be regularly successful at taking older bucks, whether you prefer to hunt from a tree stand or not. But I'm hoping I'll be able to convince you that you should at least try hunting with a stool. This year, counting that yearling buckbill, we took 4 of our $5 from stools at ground level. 1 from a tree stand, opening day. Opening weekend is all right for tree stands, but once those big bucks know they're being hunted, you can't just keep going back to that same tree stand and expect to take big bucks. So anyway, that's I just gotta get you to get a stool. Make one like a lot of guys do, or buy something that'll work as well if there is one out there, and hunt from ground level. And once you do, you're gonna love what happens. You're gonna be a devoted buck hunter the rest of your life. So with that, thanks for watching, and thank you guys too for pressing that button and subscribing to my YouTube channel. That's so important. You know, I want to keep doing this, and then my being able to continue this depends on how many of you keep subscribing to my YouTube channel. And just as important, how many of you poke that thumbs up button because you like what you just heard. So please take a moment to do that. It costs nothing, only takes a minute or two, and it's all set, and it'll help me to be able to continue what I've been doing here with all these YouTube presentations. So now then, think about what I told you today, and thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon. Be sure to visit my website. Here's the link. Here you'll find links to my blog posts, my Twitter account, my YouTube account, my Amazon store with links to my ebooks, my son's eBay store, a money saver if you're ordering from Canada or other countries, my website bookstore, and much more.